There's a moment that happens almost every time Erling Haaland plays football, and defenders have started to dread it more than almost anything else in the modern game. The ball drops somewhere in the box, there's half a yard of space, and you watch this enormous, almost impossibly fast striker arrive on it like he's been fired out of something. By the time most defenders have processed what's happening, the ball is already in the net. He's broken Premier League records that took the greatest goal scorers in English football history a full season longer to even approach. He's broken Champions League records that experienced strikers in their prime couldn't touch as teenagers. He's rewritten what an entire nation believed was possible for its national team, and right now as you're watching this, he's doing it on the biggest stage in football, wearing the shirt of a country that waited 28 years just to get back to a World Cup. But to understand how a kid from a town of 12,000 people in the south of Norway became the most feared finisher on the planet, you have to go all the way back to the very beginning, to a family that seemed almost engineered to produce an athlete like this. Erling Braut Haaland was born in Leeds, England, in the summer of 2000, while his father, Alf Inge Haaland, was playing professionally for Leeds United. Alf Inge had built a respectable career in English football, turning out for Nottingham Forest, Leeds, and eventually Manchester City. And he was a tough, combative midfielder who knew exactly what it took to survive in a brutal league. Erling's mother, Gry Marita Braut, had her own sporting pedigree as a national heptathlon champion back home in Norway, which meant that from the moment he was born, this kid had genetics that read like a science experiment in athletic performance. When Erling was still small, the family moved back to Bryn, a quiet town on Norway's southwestern coast, and it was there that something in him started to reveal itself. He didn't just play football as a kid. He played handball, he ran track, he even played golf, and at 5 years old, he reportedly set a world record for his age group in the standing long jump, leaping over 1.5 meters without a run-up, a record that people still talk about today whenever they're trying to explain why his combination of power and explosiveness feels almost unfair on a football pitch. Even before anyone outside Bryn had heard his name, the people who actually knew him were starting to whisper that this kid was built differently. By the time he was a teenager, Haaland wasn't just playing with kids his own age anymore, because frankly, there wasn't much point. He was training and playing senior football at 15 years before most academy prospects even get a sniff of first-team football, and the coaches around him kept noticing the same thing over and over. It wasn't just his physical gifts that set him apart. It was how seriously he took every single training session, how obsessively he studied his own game, how little he seemed to care whether he was playing a friendly with his mates or a match that scouts were watching. Word started reaching Norway's youth national teams, and once he started scoring for his country at age group level, the wider football world began paying attention for the first time. He signed with Molde in 2017, and the timing couldn't have been better, because the man waiting to coach him there was Ole Gunnar Solskjær, a fellow Norwegian who understood exactly what kind of player he was looking at and exactly how to develop him. It was at Molde, in the summer of 2018, that European football got its first real warning shot. Brann were sitting top of the Norwegian league at the time, unbeaten, looking every bit like the best team in the country, and a 17-year-old Haaland walked onto the pitch and dismantled them almost single-handedly, scoring all 4 goals in a 4-0 win in barely 20 minutes of football. It wasn't just the number of goals that stunned people. It was the speed at which he scored them, the sense that he'd simply decided the game was over and nobody on the other side could do anything to stop him. Clips of that performance spread fast, and for the first time, scouts from outside Scandinavia started showing up specifically to watch him. Red Bull Salzburg moved first, signing him in January 2019, and within months he was doing something that no teenager had ever really done before, terrorizing the Champions League. He scored a hat-trick on his Champions League debut against Genk and then kept scoring match after match, eventually becoming the first teenager in the competition's history to find the net in 5 consecutive Champions League games, with goals against sides like Napoli and Liverpool along the way. In total, he scored 28 goals in just 22 appearances for Salzburg, a strike rate so absurd that almost every major club in Europe suddenly wanted him, and it became less a question of whether he'd leave and more a question of which giant would win the race to sign him. It was Borussia Dortmund who won that race, and what happened next turned Haaland from a hot prospect into a genuine phenomenon. He made his Bundesliga debut off the bench, with Dortmund trailing Augsburg 3-1, and in the space of 23 minutes, he scored a hat-trick to turn the game on its head, finishing it off as a 5-3 win, becoming only the second player in Dortmund's history to score a hat-trick on his debut. It set the tone for everything that followed in Germany, where his combination of brute strength, frightening top speed, and ruthlessly efficient finishing started to genuinely scare defenders rather than just impress pundits. He won the Golden Boy Award as the best young player in European football. He kept smashing Champions League scoring records for fastest to certain goal totals, and by the time his time in Germany was winding down, the conversation among scouts and rival managers wasn't whether he could succeed at the very top of the game. It was simply how high his ceiling actually went. When Manchester City paid around £50 million to sign him in the summer of 2022, there were still doubters, people who pointed out that the Premier League was a different beast entirely, faster, more physical, more relentless than anything he'd faced in Austria or Germany, and that plenty of prolific scorers from other leagues had arrived in England and quietly disappeared. Haaland answered those doubts almost immediately, scoring twice on his full Premier League debut against West Ham, and from there, he simply never stopped. He racked up hat-trick after hat-trick. He reached 50 Premier League goals faster than anyone in the competition's history. And by the end of that debut season, he had set a new record for the most goals ever scored by a single player in a 38-game Premier League season, with 36, smashing a mark that had stood since the league expanded decades earlier. Add in cup competitions in Europe, and his total for that one season reached 52 goals, another club record, while Manchester City completed the treble, winning the Premier League, the FA Cup, and the Champions League in the same campaign. He won the Premier League Golden Boot, the European Golden Shoe, the Gerd Müller Trophy for the world's top scorer, UEFA's Men's Player of the Year award, and finished runner-up for the Ballon d'Or, becoming the only player in history to win both the league's Young Player and Player of the Season awards in the same year. Defenders weren't just losing individual battles against him anymore. Entire teams were being built specifically around the question of how to stop one man. And yet, for all of that, there was one thing missing from Haaland's career, a stage he'd never been allowed to play on, because his country simply hadn't been there to invite him. Norway hadn't reached a World Cup since 1998, a drought of nearly 3 decades that had swallowed an entire generation of talented Norwegian players who retired without ever pulling on their country's shirt at the tournament that matters most. Haaland made it his mission to end that wait, and the numbers he produced trying to do it were staggering even by his own standards. In October 2024, he scored to become Norway's all-time leading goalscorer, breaking a record that had stood since 1937. The following year, he became the fastest player in history to reach 50 international goals, breaking a record set by Harry Kane. And along the way, he scored 5 goals in a single World Cup qualifying match against Moldova, the first European player to manage that feat in a qualifier since the 1970s. He scored against Italy not once but twice during qualification, helping Norway beat them for the first time in 25 years. And by the time the campaign finished, Norway had won all 8 of their qualifying matches, scoring 37 goals and conceding only 5, finishing comfortably ahead of Italy at the top of their group. 28 years of waiting, and Haaland had simply refused to let his country wait any longer. And now, as you watch this, that story is still being written in real time. Norway opened their long-awaited World Cup return against Iraq, and Haaland marked the occasion the only way he knows how, scoring twice in a 4-1 win, becoming his country's joint all-time top scorer at international tournaments within his very first appearance on the World Cup stage. Norway currently sit at the top of their group, with Senegal and then France still to come, and a nation that spent 28 years simply hoping to qualify is now daring to wonder how far this golden generation, with Haaland leading the line, can actually go. It's worth stepping back for a second and remembering where all of this started. A boy in a town of 12,000 people, jumping further than any 5-year-old on record, scoring hundreds of goals before most kids his age had settled on a favorite team, training while his friends were still figuring out which sport they liked best. Defenders across Europe call him a machine, a cyborg, a nightmare, because there genuinely isn't an adequate human word for what he does to a football pitch. And yet, what's remarkable is that he's still only in his mid-20s, with most of his career still ahead of him. Most footballers spend their entire careers chasing records that legends set decades before they were born. Erling Haaland just keeps breaking them, one after another. And if this is what the first half of his story looks like, it's genuinely terrifying to imagine what the second half has in store.